Black CEO humiliated by billionaire family. Seconds later, their entire empire collapses. Hello everyone, before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. Stop pretending to be VIP. People like you don't belong in rooms like this. The words cracked through the grand ballroom like glass snapping against marble. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks froze above porcelain plates. Beneath the massive crystal chandelier, its golden light dripping over tuxedos and silk gowns, a white woman in an emerald green dress stood rigid with outrage, her finger thrust forward like a weapon. She was close, now too close, her perfectly sculpted smile replaced by something sharp and humiliating. Her voice wasn't just loud. It was deliberate. Designed to be heard. Across from her stood a black woman in a royal blue gown, elegant and understated, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. She didn't flinch. She didn't step back. She didn't apologize. Between them, a white man in a black tuxedo adjusted his cufflinks and smirked, the corners of his mouth lifting with quiet satisfaction. He said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence was agreement. His presence was permission. A ripple moved through the room. Some guests laughed nervously. Others glanced away, pretending to study their wine glasses. A few phones rose discreetly, lenses glinting as they began to record what they assumed would be another piece of entertainment, another public correction of someone who had dared to stand where she supposedly didn't belong. The woman in green leaned in even closer, lowering her voice just enough to make it sting more. "You can't just walk into a gala like this and expect respect," she said, her tone dripping with entitlement. "This table is for donors. For real power. Not guests who slipped past security." A murmur followed. Soft. Complicit. The black woman's eyes moved slowly across the room. She took in the chandeliers, the linen-covered tables, the faces polished by old money and inherited confidence. Faces that looked at her not with curiosity but with judgment. With certainty. She had seen this look before. The man in the tuxedo finally spoke, his voice smooth, amused. "Let's not cause a scene," he said lightly, though his eyes betrayed enjoyment. "I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding. The word hung in the air like a lie everyone was willing to accept. The woman in green scoffed. "Oh, I'm sure," she said. "But misunderstandings happen when people don't know their place." A sharp inhale rippled through the nearest table. Someone whispered, "This is uncomfortable." Someone else whispered back, "She should have known better." Still, the black woman said nothing. She reached down calmly and adjusted the hem of her dress, smoothing invisible wrinkles, her movements slow and controlled. The kind of calm that unsettles people who expect embarrassment. Or fear. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to Ariana Cole. Ariana lifted her gaze and met the woman's eyes. Not with anger. Not with hurt. But with something colder. Calculated. A stillness that didn't ask for approval. The chandelier above them flickered slightly, as if reacting to the shift in the room. The woman in green laughed again, louder this time. "Look at her," she said, turning to the guests beside her. "Standing there like she owns the place." The man in the tuxedo chuckled. "Confidence is cute," he added. "When it's earned." More laughter followed, thin, brittle, uncomfortable. Ariana finally spoke. Her voice was calm. Even. Almost gentle. I was invited, she said. The woman in green rolled her eyes. By whom? Ariana didn't answer right away. She glanced down at her watch instead. A simple movement. Easy to miss. Easy to underestimate. The silence stretched. Somewhere in the back of the room, a server paused mid-step. A violinist's bow hesitated above the strings. Even the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Ariana looked back up, her expression unchanged. I think, she said softly, we're about to find out. The man in the tuxedo's smile tightened. Is that a threat? No, Ariana replied. It's timing. Her phone vibrated once in her hand. Just once. She didn't check it yet. The woman in green crossed her arms, confidence radiating from every polished gesture. Security, she called out, her voice ringing clear and sharp. Can we please escort this woman away before she embarrasses herself further? No one moved. Ariana finally looked down at her screen. One message. One confirmation. Her thumb hovered for a fraction of a second. Then she tapped. In that moment, before anyone understood what was happening, before the first phone would buzz, before the first account would freeze, before the first empire would begin to crack, the balance of power in that glittering room shifted forever. And the people laughing had no idea they were standing at the edge of their own collapse. The room didn't recover. It tried to. Strings resumed their gentle sweep, servers moved again, glasses clinked, but the rhythm was off. Something had cracked beneath the chandeliers, and no amount of polished laughter could seal it back together. Ariana remained exactly where she was. The woman in green shifted her weight, clearly expecting Ariana to leave. To apologize. To shrink. When none of that happened, irritation crept into her smile. Well, she said, glancing around as if the room itself would back her up. Are we done here? No one answered. The tuxedoed man cleared his throat, finally uneasy. He leaned closer to Ariana, lowering his voice in a way meant to sound reasonable. Look, he said, you've made your point. But let's be honest, this isn't the hill you want to die on. Ariana turned her head slightly, meeting his eyes for the first time. Isn't it? She asked. It wasn't defiance in her tone. It was curiosity. A few guests exchanged looks. A woman at the nearest table whispered something into her husband's ear. He shook his head, eyes fixed on Ariana, trying to place her. Trying and failing. The woman in green scoffed again. Confidence like that usually comes with credentials, she said. And I don't recall seeing yours on the list. She gestured toward the head table, where embossed place cards gleamed under soft light. Names that carried weight. Names that opened doors. Ariana followed the gesture, then looked back. You're right, she said calmly. You wouldn't recognize mine. That should have been the end of it. A clean dismissal. But something about the way she said it, unapologetic, precise, made the man in the tuxedo frown. Behind them, phones buzzed. Quietly. One by one. The kind of vibration people try to ignore at formal events. A waiter hesitated near the edge of the room, eyes flicking between Ariana and the head table. A security guard shifted his stance, suddenly unsure who he was supposed to be watching. The woman in green noticed the change and bristled. Why is everyone staring? She snapped. This is ridiculous. She turned back to Ariana, lowering her voice again, sharp with warning. Do yourself a favor. Walk away now. Save what little dignity you have left. Ariana didn't move. She glanced around the room instead, at the donors, the executives, the politicians pretending not to listen. At the people who had laughed moments ago and were now quiet, calculating. This room, Ariana said softly, is full of people who mistake access for authority. The words landed heavier than any insult. The man in the tuxedo straightened. "You're crossing a line." Ariana nodded once. "I know." Another phone buzzed. Louder this time. Someone near the bar checked theirs, then froze. A second later, another guest did the same. The woman in green followed their gazes, confusion creeping into her expression. "What is going on?" she demanded. Ariana finally took a step forward, not toward them, but past them toward the center of the room. The movement was subtle, but it drew every eye. "I didn't come here to argue," she said. "And I didn't come here to be validated." She paused, just long enough for the silence to tighten. "I came here to observe." The tuxedoed man swallowed. "Observe what?" Ariana looked at him, then at the woman in green, then at the crowd. "Character," she replied. They decided who Ariana was without asking her. That part came easily. To the woman in green, she was a mistake, someone who slipped past the velvet rope because the system wasn't perfect. To the man in the tuxedo, she was a nuisance, an ego that needed correcting before it disrupted the evening's optics. To the room at large, she became something even simpler. An assumption. "She must be someone's plus one," a man whispered near the bar, adjusting his tie as if proximity alone granted authority. "Or staff," another replied quietly. "Look at the dress. Nice, but not right." Their eyes traveled over Ariana like auditors searching for flaws. No visible security. No entourage. No performative confidence. Nothing that matched their internal checklist of importance. At the head table, the woman in green leaned toward a guest with silver hair and old money posture. "I don't know how she got in," she muttered. "But I won't have her turning this into a spectacle." The guest nodded, satisfied with that explanation. Spectacles were only acceptable when they were controlled. Ariana heard none of this directly. She didn't need to. The room spoke its judgments through body language, through the way shoulders turned away, through conversations that resumed without her, through the silent agreement that she was the anomaly. She stood still, hands relaxed at her sides, watching it unfold. The irony was sharp. Several of the men avoiding her gaze ran companies she had invested in quietly years ago. One of the foundations listed on the program brochure had been stabilized by a grant she approved without attaching her name. The quartet playing near the stage had been hired through a cultural initiative her firm funded anonymously. But anonymity was the point. Ariana had learned early that visibility invited noise. Control lived in silence. "Do you know her?" a young woman whispered to her date, nodding toward Ariana. He shook his head. "No idea. But if she mattered, we'd know." That assumption, "if she mattered, we'd know," had carried entire empires into the ground before. The tuxedoed man glanced toward the exit, then back at Ariana. His jaw tightened. This wasn't going the way it was supposed to. Embarrassment usually worked faster. People usually folded. "You're making this uncomfortable for everyone," he said, stepping closer again. "This is a private event." Ariana met his gaze evenly. "Then it's strange," she said, "how public the judgment has been." He opened his mouth to respond, then hesitated. Something about her calm unsettled him. It didn't match the narrative he'd assigned her. Across the room, another phone buzzed. Then another. Subtle. Persistent. A man near the head table glanced at his screen and frowned. He turned it slightly away, as if embarrassed to be seen reading something unexpected. A woman beside him leaned in, her expression shifting as she read over his shoulder. "What is it?" she whispered. He didn't answer right away. The woman in green noticed. "Is there a problem?" she asked sharply. "No," he said quickly. Too quickly. "Just work." Ariana watched that exchange with quiet interest. This was the part most people never notice, the moment when confidence begins to erode, not with confrontation, but with doubt. When the story people tell themselves no longer fits the evidence forming in their hands. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't defended herself. She hadn't revealed anything. She had simply stayed. And in a room built on appearances, that was enough to make the assumptions wobble. The woman in green crossed her arms, irritation hardening into something closer to unease. "I don't like this," she muttered to the man in the tuxedo. "End it?" He nodded, though his eyes drifted again, this time not to Ariana, but to the guests checking their phones. Ariana looked around once more, committing the scene to memory. They still thought they were deciding who she was. They had no idea they were being assessed in return. They had no way of knowing who Ariana really was. That wasn't an accident. It was design. For nearly 2 decades, Ariana Cole had built her world without spectacle. No magazine covers. No panel appearances. No carefully curated interviews about breaking barriers. She had watched others do that and then watched their leverage disappear the moment the spotlight moved on. Power, she learned, didn't need applause. It needed access. Most people in that room had encountered her work without ever seeing her face. Through holding companies. Through legal entities layered with intent. Through capital that arrived quietly, stabilized what was broken, and never asked to be thanked. She preferred it that way. The tuxedoed man gestured toward a nearby chair, trying once more to regain control. "Let's sit," he said, voice tight. "We can talk like adults." Ariana didn't take the seat. "Talk about what?" she asked. He hesitated. That hesitation told her everything. He didn't know what conversation he was trying to steer, only that he needed one where he wasn't losing ground. The woman in green watched them closely now, her earlier confidence thinning. She glanced toward the head table again, then toward the screens lining the far wall, where sponsor logos rotated between speeches and musical interludes. She frowned. One of the logos lingered a second longer than the rest before fading. It wasn't a name she recognized. Not consciously. But something about it tugged at her. Ariana noticed the look. This was the part no one ever saw, the moment before recognition, when intuition begins to whisper louder than arrogance. When certainty cracks, just slightly. "You know," Ariana said, almost conversationally, "I used to think rooms like this were intimidating." The man in the tuxedo stiffened. "Used to?" "Yes," she replied. "Before I understood how fragile they are." Across the room, a senior banker leaned toward his colleague, phone angled low. "That logo," he murmured. "Where have I seen it?" The colleague's eyes widened as he scrolled. "It can't be." The banker swallowed. "She wouldn't be here." Ariana took another slow step forward, heels clicking softly against the polished floor. The sound carried. "I realized something a long time ago," she continued. "The loudest people in the room usually need the most reassurance." The woman in green bristled. "This is getting absurd," she snapped. "Who do you think you are?" Ariana met her gaze calmly. "Someone who understands leverage," she said. The tuxedoed man opened his mouth to interrupt, but his phone buzzed again, this time sharp, insistent. He glanced down despite himself. The color drained from his face. He looked up at Ariana, searching now not for flaws, but for answers. She gave him none. Behind them, murmurs grew less subtle. Guests leaned together, whispers overlapping. A man near the stage abruptly ended a call, his hand trembling as he lowered his phone. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. "The numbers were solid an hour ago." Ariana watched the room shift with the quiet focus of someone observing a system under stress. This was what she did. She studied structures. Found pressure points. Measured reactions. And tonight, the most revealing data wasn't financial. It was human. She hadn't announced herself. She hadn't demanded respect. She hadn't corrected a single assumption. She had simply remained present long enough for the truth to surface on its own. The woman in green took an involuntary step back. For the first time that evening, she wasn't certain who was standing in front of her. And somewhere deep beneath the chandeliers, beneath the music and the murmurs, the illusion holding the room together began to fracture. The shift didn't announce itself. It arrived quietly between glances, between vibrations of phones no one wanted to answer, between the fading confidence of people who were used to being certain. Ariana felt it before she saw it. Not in the room, but in the rhythm. The way conversations lost their footing. The way posture changed, shoulders tightening, smiles flattening, laughter abandoning its ease. This was the moment structures revealed themselves. Not when they were strong but when they were stressed. Her phone rested in her palm, dark now. The message she'd received minutes earlier didn't need rereading. It had been precise. Confirmed. Irreversible. She lifted her eyes. The man in the tuxedo was watching her openly now. Not with disdain. With calculation. He had recognized the feeling creeping up his spine, the one executives learned to fear long before numbers turned red. "What did you do?" he asked, keeping his voice low. Ariana tilted her head slightly. "I paid attention." "That's not an answer." "No," she agreed. "It's a warning." Across the room, a senior partner from a private equity firm stepped away from a cluster of donors, his phone pressed tightly to his ear. His face was pale. He nodded once, sharply, then ended the call without saying goodbye. He scanned the room. His eyes landed on Ariana. He looked away just as quickly. The woman in green followed his gaze, her irritation hardening into something brittle. "Enough," she snapped. "I want her out. Now." She turned toward security again, but the words stalled in her throat. One of the guards was already distracted checking his own phone, brow furrowed. Another stood uncertainly, waiting for instruction that no longer felt clear. "Why aren't you doing anything?" she demanded. The guard hesitated. "Ma'am, we've been advised to wait." "By whom?" He didn't answer. Ariana took a single step forward. Not aggressive. Not defiant. Just intentional. "This is the moment," she said calmly, "when people usually start asking the wrong questions." The man in the tuxedo swallowed. "Then what's the right one?" Ariana met his eyes. "Who still has control?" she said. A murmur rippled outward, no longer whispered. A woman near the head table stared openly at her phone, then at the man beside her. "They froze it," she said under her breath. "All of it?" "That's impossible," he replied automatically. "Check," she said. He did. His expression collapsed. The woman in green laughed once short, disbelieving. "This is absurd. You think you can just walk into my family's event and—" Ariana raised her hand. The gesture was small. Precise. It silenced her anyway. "I didn't walk in," Ariana said. "I was invited. And I didn't come to take anything." She paused, letting the weight settle. "I came to withdraw." The man in the tuxedo stepped back, color draining from his face. "You can't do that tonight." "I already did." Phones buzzed again, this time in clusters. The sound spread like static through the room. A banker near the stage cursed under his breath. Another guest abruptly sat down, as if the floor had shifted beneath him. The woman in green shook her head, backing away. "No," she said. "This doesn't make sense. You're nobody." Ariana regarded her steadily. "That's the advantage," she replied. "Nobody watches you until it's too late." She glanced once more around the room at the faces now stripped of certainty, at the chandeliers glittering above a structure that no longer held. Then she looked back at them. "Seconds matter," Ariana said quietly. especially the ones you waste underestimating people. And with that, the collapse already in motion became undeniable. The collapse didn't look like chaos. It looked like silence. At first, people mistook it for a technical issue. A delay. A glitch. Something temporary that would be smoothed over by assistance and apologies before dessert was served. But then the calls stopped being returned. A man near the head table stood abruptly, his chair scraping too loudly against the floor. He pressed his phone to his ear again, pacing a few steps before stopping cold. Whatever he heard on the other end drained the color from his face. "That's not possible," he said quietly. "We finalized that this morning." The reply came fast enough to cut him off. He lowered the phone slowly. Around him, other guests were doing the same, ending calls, checking messages, staring at screens as if they might rearrange themselves if looked at long enough. Ariana watched it all without expression. This was the part people never prepared for. Not the downfall itself, but the moment when denial no longer worked, and no one knew who to listen to. The woman in green grabbed the man in the tuxedo by the sleeve. "Fix this," she hissed. "Call someone. Anyone." "I'm trying," he snapped back, panic creeping through his composure. "They're not answering." Across the room, a senior banker leaned toward his wife, his voice shaking despite the effort to keep it low. "Liquidity's gone," he said. "They pulled everything. Every line." Her eyes widened. "All of it?" He nodded. A ripple of unease moved through the gala. Conversations broke apart mid-sentence. Smiles vanished. Laughter didn't return. A security supervisor approached the man in the tuxedo, his tone cautious now. "Sir," he said, "we've been instructed to hold positions and await further direction." "From who?" the man demanded. The supervisor hesitated. "From upstairs." That answer meant nothing and everything. The woman in green turned back to Ariana, her voice sharp but unsteady. "You think this makes you powerful," she said. "Pulling stunts like this?" Ariana met her gaze calmly. "No," she replied. "Power is what allows you to walk away without explaining yourself." She glanced toward the exits. They were still open. Still unobstructed. No one was stopping her. That realization unsettled the room more than any raised voice could have. A guest near the bar whispered, "Who is she?" No one answered. Another phone rang loud this time, cutting through the hum. The man who answered it listened for only a few seconds before sitting down heavily, as if his legs no longer trusted him. "They've suspended trading," he said to no one in particular. The words spread quickly. "Suspended? Trading?" The woman in green staggered back a step. "This is insane," she muttered. "This is our event." Ariana nodded slightly. "That's what makes it efficient." The man in the tuxedo stared at her, eyes wide now. "You planned this?" "I anticipated outcomes," Ariana corrected. "There's a difference." She took a breath, steady and unhurried, while the room around her fractured into quiet panic. The chandeliers still shone. The music had stopped without anyone noticing when. Servers stood frozen, trays trembling slightly in their hands. Ariana adjusted the strap of her dress and turned toward the exit. Behind her, the empire that had once filled the room with certainty was unraveling, not with a crash, but with a series of irrevocable confirmations. And for the first time that night, no one tried to stop her. The realization didn't arrive all at once. It moved through the room in waves. At first, it was denial guests refreshing screens, stepping aside to make urgent calls, whispering reassurances to themselves that this would pass. That this was temporary. That someone important would fix it. Then came confusion. People began comparing messages. Cross-checking alerts. The same words appeared again and again, no matter which device they held. Withdrawn. Suspended. Effective immediately. A man near the stage let out a sharp breath and laughed once, hollow. This has to be a mistake, he said, though his eyes didn't believe it. His companion didn't answer. She was staring at Ariana. Others followed. Heads turned not subtly now. Not politely. The same faces that had dismissed her moments earlier were studying her with new urgency, trying to reconcile what they were seeing with what they had assumed. That's her, someone whispered. She's the one. The woman in green heard it and stiffened. What are they saying? She snapped. No one responded right away. The man in the tuxedo looked around the room, finally seeing what he'd missed before the way conversation stopped when Ariana moved, the way eyes tracked her without apology. They're saying, he said slowly, that she's connected. The word felt insufficient even as he said it. Ariana stood near the edge of the ballroom now, close enough to leave but in no hurry to do so. She watched the shift with detached focus. This was the moment people remembered. Not the insult. Not the laughter. The silence that followed. A donor approached cautiously, his earlier confidence replaced by restraint. Ms. He stopped, realizing he didn't know her name. I'm sorry for what happened earlier, he said, voice low. There's been a misunderstanding. Ariana regarded him calmly. There was, she agreed. He nodded quickly. If there's anything we can do to make this right. She didn't answer. Behind him, others gathered courage. Apologies formed. Explanations rehearsed themselves aloud. The same people who had looked away now leaned in, eager to be seen doing the right thing. The woman in green watched it happen, her face tight with disbelief. They're overreacting, she said, though no one seemed to hear her anymore. This doesn't change anything. But it already had. Ariana turned back toward the center of the room one last time. The chandeliers reflected off 100 uneasy faces, people recalculating where they stood, and with whom. This, she said quietly, not addressing anyone in particular, is what accountability sounds like. No one laughed. No one argued. They only watched as she walked toward the exit, leaving behind a room that finally understood who had been holding the power all along. They tried to stop her. Not with force. Not with authority. But with something far more desperate. Wait. The voice cut through the low hum of the room just as Ariana reached the edge of the ballroom. It was the man in the tuxedo. He had followed her too quickly, too openly, his earlier composure gone. This doesn't have to end like this, he said, lowering his voice as if proximity could repair damage already done. There's been an escalation. But we can talk. Privately. Ariana paused, but didn't turn around. Behind him, the woman in green pushed forward, heels striking the floor too hard. You're enjoying this, she snapped. Making a spectacle. Ariana turned then. Slowly. No, she said evenly. I endured one. The woman's mouth opened, then closed again. Her confidence had nowhere left to stand. Around them, guests pretended not to watch, though every movement betrayed their attention. We misjudged you, the man said quickly. If something was said, if offense was taken. Don't, Ariana interrupted. The single word stopped him. You didn't misjudge me, she continued. You judged exactly the way you always do. You just didn't expect consequences. The woman in green crossed her arms, grasping for control. This is ridiculous, she said. You think one dramatic exit gives you leverage. Ariana's gaze was steady. Leverage doesn't announce itself, she replied. It's already working by the time people notice. The man swallowed. Let's reset, he said. We can issue a statement. Smooth this over. No one has to lose everything. Ariana studied him for a moment, not with anger, but with clarity. Everything, she echoed softly. You think this is about loss? She shook her head. This is about exposure. The woman in green's voice rose, sharp with panic now. You can't do this to us. Do you know who we are? Ariana held her gaze. Yes, she said. That's why this happened. Silence pressed in around them. I was quiet, Ariana continued, because I was listening. I wanted to hear how you speak when you think no one who matters is in the room. She stepped back, creating distance where they'd hoped for negotiation. You don't get to apologize for who you are when it finally costs you something. The man's shoulders sagged. What do you want? He asked. Ariana considered the question, then answered honestly. Nothing, she said. That's the point. She turned toward the exit again. No guards moved. No hands reached out. The path remained clear. Behind her, the woman in green stood frozen, her power stripped bare in front of a room that no longer believed in it. And this time, no one tried to follow. The room didn't follow her out. It stayed behind, trapped beneath chandeliers that no longer felt celebratory, surrounded by tables that suddenly looked like evidence. No music returned. No laughter dared to test the air again. Ariana stepped into the night. The doors closed softly behind her, sealing the noise inside. Outside, the city breathed as it always had, indifferent, vast, honest. Cool air met her skin, steadying, familiar. She paused at the top of the steps, just long enough to exhale. Inside, the fallout accelerated. Calls that once opened doors now went unanswered. Long-standing partnerships were under review. Boards convened emergency meetings without their usual confidence. The same names that had commanded rooms for decades began to surface in whispers attached to words like exposed, over-leveraged, unsustainable. By morning, the story would be everywhere. Not framed as scandal, but as consequence. Ariana didn't watch it unfold. She never did. Once the decision was made, her attention moved forward. She slipped into the waiting car without ceremony, the door closing with a quiet finality. As the vehicle pulled away, the gala faded into reflection, golden light shrinking in the glass, an empire reduced to an image. Inside that room, the woman in green stood motionless long after Ariana was gone. Conversations avoided her. Eyes slid past her. Power, once assumed, now felt conditional, fragile. The man in the tuxedo sat down heavily, staring at the table as if it might explain where certainty had gone. It wouldn't. Nothing in that room could. They had mistaken access for authority. Volume for influence. Proximity for control. Ariana had never needed any of it. She had understood something they hadn't, that dignity isn't reactive. That power doesn't argue. And that the most decisive moments rarely announce themselves. The city lights stretched ahead as the car moved on, reflections dancing across the window. Ariana watched them quietly, already focused on what came next. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't demanded respect. She hadn't needed to. All she had done was remain exactly who she was, long enough for the truth to surface and for those who underestimated her to learn the cost of that mistake. Some lessons arrive loudly. The most permanent ones don't.